Sometimes, life doesn't ask for your permission before forcing you to face the very thing you've spent years running from. As the Stoics believed, the obstacle becomes the way, and today, Caleb Whitaker was about to collide with his. Hidden within the silent corridors of Crescent Bay Medical Center, a single moment stood ready to unravel decades of buried secrets and long-held regrets. Caleb Whitaker, a man whose fortunes skyrocketed to millions after a breakthrough in cybersecurity software, never thought he'd confront his past in a stark hospital room. But fate had other plans. It all began the moment he stepped through a heavy set of doors, heart pounding in his chest, only to lock eyes with the woman he had vowed never to see again. Lying beside her were two identical boys, small and delicate, faces he had never seen. His world was about to change forever. Caleb Whitaker woke up in his luxury penthouse, towering over the vibrant skyline of downtown Miami, already dreading what the day might hold. When he first purchased the top-floor unit in the heart of the city, the panoramic view had symbolized his relentless ambition. He often joked that from up there, you could see the future. But today, the same view felt suffocating, like the world was caving in on him. The sharp buzz of his phone snapped him out of his haze. It was his longtime personal assistant, Hannah Lee, who had been with him since the early startup days of Whitaker Cybertech. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, her tone gentle but urgent, "there's been an emergency at Crescent Bay Medical. We're mother's stable, but they're asking you to come in immediately. It's related to her heart condition, some complication." Caleb's body tensed. For all his billions and charitable donations to medical research, he couldn't protect those he loved from illness. He told Hannah he was heading out right after a quick shower. He threw on a tailored navy suit jacket, not bothering to check if it matched his slacks. Grabbing the keys to his sleek black Tesla, he took the elevator to the underground garage and navigated the morning traffic with measured urgency. Though Crescent Bay Medical was only a 15-minute drive, every stoplight felt like an eternity. The route dragged on, stretched by the weight of his unease. When he finally arrived, Caleb rushed through the hospital entrance. The sharp scent of antiseptic and the low murmur of worried families reminded him of how fragile life truly was. He flashed his ID at the nurse's station, barely noticing the curious glances from interns who recognized him from a Forbes feature. On the third floor, he found his mother's room. She greeted him with a weary smile, her once raven black hair now streaked with silver, her bright eyes dimmed by fatigue. Caleb exhaled the breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The doctors explained that it was a minor medication issue that had caused the scare. She'd be fine after a few days of rest. Relief flooded through him, cooling his nerves like water on a hot day. Soon after, a nurse informed him that some routine tests had been scheduled, meaning he'd need to wait in the hallway. With time to spare, Caleb sank into a chair near the elevators. The corridor buzzed with nurses and patients, bright and active. He scanned for a coffee machine. A small sign pointed toward a vending area just around the corner. He stood, smoothed his jacket, and walked in that direction, hoping a mediocre cup of coffee might help settle his nerves. What he didn't know was that a single misstep down the wrong hallway would lead him straight into a room, and straight into the greatest secret of his life. Even before he walked into that room, Caleb's mind was a whirlwind of emotions, relief over his mother's condition, and an odd wave of nostalgia. Hospitals had once been a major part of his life, especially during the years he spent with Marissa Delgado, his ex-wife. They had first met in the fast-paced heart of Atlanta nearly a decade ago. Caleb was then an aspiring software engineer attending a Google Developers Conference in Chicago. Marissa happened to be at the same event, an ambitious marketing strategist representing a startup from Charlotte, North Carolina. He was instantly drawn to her sharp intellect, and she, in turn, was captivated by his quiet determination. A chance encounter at a coffee kiosk turned into late-night brainstorming sessions as they discovered a powerful synergy in their talents. Caleb coded new features for an app he was developing, while Marissa crafted strategies to pitch it. Their romance bloomed quickly and burned brightly. Within a year, they were married in an intimate ceremony on the scenic banks of Lake Lanier. In those early days, they craved success, but just as much, They craved each other's presence. Marissa's marketing finesse helped Caleb pitch his fledgling software prototype to early investors. That pitch turned into seed funding, and before long, Whitaker Cybertech was born. But success, as it often does, brought with it cracks. It became a wedge. Caleb's laser focus on growing the company evolved into an all-consuming routine of meetings, business travel, and product launches. Meanwhile, Marissa began to feel increasingly left out. Her role, once pivotal, faded into the background. Where once they had been partners in every sense, their dynamic shifted drastically. She began to resent the late nights and emotional distance, while he buckled under the pressure of balancing a marriage with the relentless demands of a rising company. Arguments erupted, each one sharper than the last. While Caleb stayed late at the office, Marissa endured lonely dinners at home. By the time Whitaker Cybertech gained public attention and began winning major tech awards and high-profile funding, Caleb had already relocated to the guest bedroom. Their marriage unraveled under the weight of sleepless nights, emotional exhaustion, and confessions that fell on deaf ears. When the divorce papers were signed, both were still reeling from the emotional wreckage. The paperwork was finalized a month before Caleb's software suite, an AI-powered data analytics platform, was acquired by an international conglomerate for an 8-figure sum. Marissa signed a settlement that granted her only a fraction of what Whitaker Cybertech was worth. But at that point, the money seemed meaningless to her, just a footnote in her heartbreak. After the divorce, Caleb heard vague whispers that Marissa had moved to Phoenix. He sent a few emails, tried calling once or twice, but she never answered. In his guilt, he let her go, reasoning that distance might be the closure they both needed. He never imagined that there might be more to the story, chapters hidden away that could upend everything he thought he knew about her. And now, here at Crescent Bay Medical Center, she was closer than he'd ever guessed. He had no idea Marissa was even in the same city, let alone in the very hospital he now wandered through. After grabbing a lukewarm coffee from the vending machine, Caleb navigated the maze-like hallways, intending to return to his mother's room. But the layout confused him. Where he expected a left turn, he found himself walking into a new wing entirely. He checked the signs, muttered a quiet curse, and turned down another corridor lined with unremarkable white doors. One stood ajar at the end of the hallway, marked Pediatrics. There was something oddly magnetic about it, as if some unseen current pulled him toward it. His coffee had gone cold. He took slow, uncertain steps. Then, peering through the slight opening, he saw a nurse adjusting an IV beside a hospital bed. A figure stood next to it, slender, with chestnut-brown hair pulled back into a messy bun. He recognized that silhouette even before her face fully came into view. Marissa Delgado. His breath caught in his throat. The hallway seemed to tilt, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. Of all places, of all times, what was she doing here, and why in the pediatrics ward? He took a reflexive step back, unsure whether to enter or disappear quietly. But then he saw them, 2 small boys, no older than 5 or 6, curled up side by side on the bed. They were identical, from the shape of their faces to the rich brown shade of their hair, a mirror image of Marissa's. Caleb's chest tightened. Twin sons, Marissa's kids. Could they be? One of the boys stirred, coughing faintly. Marissa bent over him, murmuring soft words of comfort. Caleb couldn't make out the words, but her voice, still neurotic, still familiar, floated into the hallway. In that moment, a wave of longing and confusion crashed into him. He stood frozen in the hallway, caught between the urge to run into the room and the impulse to turn away. He needed answers. Something deep inside him screamed that these children might be his. But how? Why hadn't Marissa ever told him? Their divorce had been finalized years ago, yet these boys looked about 5 years old, maybe slightly younger. The timing aligned all too perfectly with the final year of their unraveling marriage. His thoughts scattered in every direction: betrayal, heartbreak, guilt, disbelief, and something dangerously close to joy. As emotions battled inside him, he took a slow step forward. A nurse glanced his way, her brow lifted in mild curiosity. Marissa turned around gradually, as if sensing his presence. Their eyes met, an entire lifetime of shared memories collided between them. For a long moment, neither said a word. Then, in a trembling voice, Marissa broke the silence. "Caleb," she said. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His eyes stayed locked on the two small boys in the hospital bed. One of them shifted slightly, revealing deep brown eyes that matched Caleb's exactly. The truth hit him with crushing force. These were his sons. In that hushed hospital room, the space between former lovers carried a universe of pain, secrets, and questions. Outside, life continued. Monitors beeped steadily. Nurses passed briskly by. But for Caleb, the world had just shifted. Everything he thought he knew tilted on its axis. He stepped into the room, unsteady. Each step echoed with questions he couldn't yet voice. Marissa stood rigidly by the bed, arms crossed over her chest, her face a tangle of sorrow, weariness, and something else. Remnants of the affection that had once held them together. "How?" Caleb's voice cracked. He cleared his throat. "How long have they?" Marissa shut her eyes briefly. "They've been here 2 days. Pneumonia," she said, her voice tight. "They'll be okay. They just need more time on IVs." Caleb tore his gaze from her to the boys. They shifted restlessly in a feverish doze. Though identical, each had small, distinguishing features. A faint freckle on one boy's cheek, a slight cowlick in the other's hair. But the overall resemblance, unmistakable. "You never told me," Caleb whispered. It wasn't an accusation, so much as a plea. "I tried." Marissa's voice broke. She looked at him, the pain raw in her eyes. "After the divorce, I found out. I picked up the phone a dozen times, but the last time we talked." She didn't need to finish. They both remembered that night, one of their last conversations, the screaming, his cruel words about her lack of ambition, her bitter accusations about his selfish drive. The memory tasted like rust in Caleb's mouth. He looked back at the twins, his heart aching under the weight of joy, sorrow, and all the years lost. "What are their names?" She hesitated. "The one with the cowlick is Ethan, the other is Aiden." Caleb murmured the names under his breath. Ethan, Aiden. As if saying them aloud would root them inside him forever. "Marissa, why?" His voice was rough. "Why didn't you at least send a letter, something?" Her eyes shone with unshed tears. She tried to hold them back. "Because I was angry and scared. You were suddenly this massive success, flying around the world, headlining tech conferences, shaking hands with Mark Zuckerberg, sitting down with Bill Gates. I didn't know how to fit in your world anymore. I was afraid you'd fight me for custody. I thought maybe it'd be easier if I just raised them on my own." A heavy silence settled between them. The quiet hum of machines, the rhythmic beeping from the monitors, it was all that filled the room. Caleb's mind drifted back to those late-stage months of their marriage, the fights, the slammed doors. Could they have handled a pregnancy back then? Could it have saved them or destroyed them faster? Just then, one of the twins stirred. Aiden's eyelids fluttered open. He looked at Caleb, his tiny face creased with confusion. Marissa immediately bent down, gently brushing his hair. "It's okay," she murmured softly. Caleb's eyes welled with tears. He longed to reach out, to say the words, to introduce himself to his son. This child had never known, but guilt and hesitation had gripped Caleb for years. He built a fortress around his heart, made of ambition, status, and an empire of success. Yet now, in this stark pediatric hospital room, that fortress was crumbling, brick by brick. Outside, the halls of Crescent Bay Medical Center were bustling with people carrying their own anxieties and sorrows. But inside the small room, Caleb Whitaker's entire world was being rewritten by 2 feverish little boys and the woman he had once vowed to love forever. For Marissa, the past 2 days at Crescent Bay had been a blur of fear and exhaustion. She had rushed Ethan and Aiden here when their fevers refused to break, driving through the night from her modest home in Fresno to this specialized children's ward in Miami. She hadn't expected her sleepless nights to become a reel of old memories, but surrounded by sterile white walls, the faint hum of fluorescent lighting, and the cries of sick children, she couldn't hold the flashbacks at bay. She remembered those early days with Caleb, his restless energy, his relentless hope, how he would code until sunrise, and she would find him asleep at his desk, slouched over a keyboard, surrounded by energy drink cans and tangled wires. She'd cover him with a blanket, kiss his cheek, and stifle a laugh. Even the mundane felt magical back then. That was before the fighting, before the resentment crept in, before the love got lost beneath unmet expectations and hurtful words. She had found out she was pregnant just weeks after their divorce was finalized. The reality struck her like a lightning bolt. She was carrying twins, Caleb's children. But by then, their communication had vanished into a void of silence and resentment. She remembered the emails she never sent, long drafts typed late at night, her tears blurring the screen. But pride stopped her from pressing send. She feared he'd see the news as a trap, as a tool to manipulate him back into her life. She'd whisper to herself, "He doesn't need this. He's building something bigger." And maybe, deep down, she was terrified he'd respond with cold detachment. So she made her choice. She would raise Ethan and Aiden alone. She accepted a job in Fresno, far removed from the cutthroat tech world that only reminded her of him. Money was tight, especially after the boys arrived prematurely. Medical bills stacked high. She'd sit at the kitchen table with her paycheck in one hand and her phone in the other, staring at his number. But every time she told herself she could do it, she had to do it. Now, watching over her sons as they lay sleeping, she felt the weight of that decision press on her chest. When she saw Caleb standing in the doorway, her heart twisted, a painful cocktail of yearning and dread. Memories slammed into her like a wave. All the what-ifs, all the missed chances. She glanced at him now. His features had changed with time, his face more defined, sharper with age and experience. But those eyes, they were the same. Intense, unreadable. There were new lines around them now, etched by stress, maybe loneliness, maybe regret. She could still see traces of the man who once dreamed with her, whispered promises in the dark. And part of her wanted to yell, to demand why he never came looking. Another part of her wanted to crumble into his arms, but none of that mattered, not compared to the two boys lying inches away. Marissa didn't know which emotion would win. The protective instinct of a mother, or the buried ache of a woman who once loved too deeply. What she did know was that life had just thrust her and Caleb into an unplanned reunion, and whatever came next would define the world of two innocent boys who deserved everything, even if their parents' past had fallen apart. Ethan and Aiden, though only 5, felt the charged energy in the room. It wasn't just the beeping machines, or the sterile smell of disinfectant. Something unspoken passed between their mom and the unfamiliar man standing by the wall. Ethan, the quieter twin, blinked at Caleb with silent curiosity. He had always been the observer, the thinker, the one who watched people's faces to understand things others missed. He saw the way his mother's jaw tightened when she looked at the stranger, and he saw how that stranger looked at them with something close to wonder. Meanwhile, Aiden, the bolder of the two, felt an odd mixture of curiosity and fatigue. He had always been the daring one, the twin who might climb a fence or chase a butterfly, while Ethan watched from the sidelines. But now, weakened by fever, Aiden could only muster a soft whisper. Still, when his gaze met Caleb's, he offered a small wave. Simple, instinctive. Caleb, overcome with emotion, gave a quiet, reassuring smile in return. Whenever their mother stepped aside, perhaps to speak with a nurse or adjust a monitor, the boys would exchange hushed whispers. "Who is he?" Ethan asked, his voice raspy from coughing. Aiden shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe a friend of Mom's." Ethan looked again at Caleb. There was something about him. Maybe the eyes, or the slope of the nose, or even the slight furrow in his brow. Something felt familiar, too familiar. A flicker of an impossible idea tightened in Ethan's small chest. Could this man be their father? At preschool, other kids talked about their dads. Ethan and Aiden had never met theirs. Sometimes, before bed, they'd ask their mom, but Marissa would gently steer the conversation elsewhere, her voice soft and her eyes tinged with sadness. "Your daddy had to go away before you were born," she would say, "but he loved you very much." It was a story too vague for them to truly understand. But now, seeing Caleb standing nearby with tears in his eyes, Ethan felt something he couldn't name, something close to hope. Marissa had always been their foundation. She worked long hours to make sure they had food, warmth, and bedtime stories. She was there for every scrape, every fever, every nightmare. But she was always tired. Sometimes Ethan would hear her crying in the kitchen late at night. He'd never told Aiden about those nights. Nights when he lay awake, listening to the soft sobs behind closed doors, wondering what made her so sad. It made him wish for someone stronger to help her. Someone they didn't have. Until now, in the quiet hum of the hospital room, the twins drifted in and out of fevered sleep. And in their dreams they saw soft, glowing images. 2 smiling adults, a warm home, a feeling of peace that seemed out of reach in waking life. Whenever the fever pulled them back to the surface, they'd see Caleb still there, pacing the floor, speaking softly with their mother, his face etched with concern. And in the innocent clarity only children can possess, they began to feel it. This man wasn't just another visitor. There was something more, something deeper. They didn't know the details, but they felt the pull of adult secrets all around them, wrapping the room in a tension they couldn't quite name. And still, between coughs and restless naps, both boys felt it, a certainty that nothing in their world would ever be the same again. Meanwhile, Caleb lingered just outside the door, after the doctor asked him to step out during a routine checkup. The hallway felt too bright, too clinical. His thoughts spun out of control. Guilt for having missed the existence of his own sons. Anger at Marissa for never telling him, and a crushing uncertainty about what came next. He leaned against the wall, suddenly aware of how unfamiliar vulnerability felt. Not the kind of calculated risk he was used to, pitching to investors, making split-second business calls, but the raw, powerless kind. The kind where someone you barely know looks up at you and sees a father you're not sure you can be. He had built his identity around achievements. Startup launches, press features, keynote speeches. Caleb Whitaker, tech innovator, venture capitalist, public speaker. A man who had always controlled the outcomes of his life. But here, in the pastel-colored pediatric wing, none of those titles mattered. His story had changed in an instant. He paced beside a line of plastic chairs, ignoring the occasional glances from passing hospital staff. His mind replayed the milestones of his career, the sleep-deprived nights, the nervous investor pitches, the glowing interviews. But none of them meant anything now, not compared to this truth. He was a father. 2 little boys existed in the world, sharing his DNA, carrying a name they didn't even know yet. And he had missed everything, their first words, their first steps, their birthdays. He tried to reason with himself. Could Marissa have told him without fear? Would he have responded with joy or with denial? Would the younger version of himself, driven, obsessed with building a tech empire, have been ready to be a dad? Images flooded his mind. Himself at 31, racing between flights, glued to a laptop, chasing acquisition deals. Would he have listened to her then? Or would he have shut her down, claimed custody? Made it worse, just as she'd feared. And for the first time, he couldn't blame her. Not fully. Not when he saw that version of himself so clearly. Too self-absorbed to pause, too ambitious to notice what was slipping away. That realization made his chest tighten. And just then, Marissa emerged from the room. He approached her carefully, as if unsure whether he had any right to stand so close. "How are they?" he asked gently. She studied him a moment before replying. "The fever's holding. Doctors say they're responding to the antibiotics, so hopefully they can go home in a few days." Caleb nodded, a flicker of relief softening the tightness in his chest. "I want to help," he said, his voice shaky with sincerity. "With the bills, with everything. You shouldn't have to carry this alone." Marissa's gaze briefly sharpened. "I've been carrying it alone for years. They're my sons." Caleb flinched. "They're ours," he corrected, his tone firmer than he'd intended. His heart pounded as Marissa's eyes welled with tears. She looked exhausted, her guard wavering. "They are," she said quietly, wrapping her arms around herself. "And I'm sorry, Caleb. I really am, but it wasn't an easy decision." He stepped a little closer. "I understand, or at least I'm trying to." His voice cracked. I don't know how to be a dad. All these years I've been chasing success, ignoring everything else." Marissa let out a shaky breath. Being a parent isn't about being perfect. It's about being there. They've wanted a dad for so long. The words hit Caleb harder than he expected. Guilt constricted around his chest like a vice. He hesitated, his eyes briefly flicking toward the hospital room. "Do you ever think," he asked, "that maybe I'm too late? That maybe all I'll ever be is a disruption in their lives?" Marissa didn't respond right away, and the silence somehow stung more than words. Caleb lowered his gaze, ashamed, not of what he'd done, but of what he hadn't done. Missed birthdays, skipped milestones, empty chairs. "I used to tell myself I was building a future for my family," he added bitterly. "But the truth is, I was building one without them. I want to be there now," he whispered. "If you'll let me." She studied his face, searching for sincerity, or maybe signs of hidden motives. After a pause, she nodded once. "Then start by being here. Sit with them, read to them, comfort them through the night. Let them know who you are." Caleb swallowed hard, emotion and anxiety swirling inside him. "I'll do whatever it takes," he promised. In that moment, he understood. Money meant nothing. The role he was stepping into required something far deeper: love, presence, vulnerability, qualities he'd buried under ambition. In the quiet of that corridor, their eyes met, and for a fleeting second, they shared something like understanding. The road ahead would be rough, scarred by old wounds and new fears, but for the first time in years, Caleb felt something like hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was still time to repair what had been broken. Later that evening, just as the sky outside turned a deep shade of indigo, another storm began brewing inside Crescent Bay Medical Center. The peaceful lull of visiting hours winding down was shattered by the arrival of a man in a crisp three-piece suit, hair slicked back, scanning the hallways like a wolf in a silk tie. Caleb, having just stepped out to speak with a billing rep about covering the twins' hospital costs, nearly ran headfirst into him. The man extended his hand with a smile too polished to be genuine. "Mr. Whitaker, I presume?" Caleb hesitated, eyeing the stranger cautiously. "Yes, and you are?" "Robert Harrington," the man said, his voice as smooth as lacquered wood. "I'm an attorney." Caleb's posture stiffened. "And I represent certain interests related to Miss Marissa Delgado," Harrington continued, opening a sleek black leather portfolio. Caleb felt an immediate jolt of suspicion. He'd dealt with enough lawyers, his own, rival firms, ex-partners, and Harrington had the unmistakable scent of trouble. "What kind of interests?" Caleb asked, trying to keep his tone even. The attorney's eyes sparkled faintly. "Ms. Delgado recently reached out to our office regarding child support. She wasn't sure about your willingness to engage, given your complicated history, and—" "Wait, hold on." Caleb's voice sharpened. "Marissa hired you?" Harrington's lips curved ever so slightly. "She made an inquiry. We ran some preliminary calculations and did a little background work. We were preparing to contact you through official channels. But I happened to see on your public profiles that you're often in the Miami area, and one of my associates happened to spot you here." Caleb felt the tension coil through his entire body. Marissa had told him she was scared to tell him about the boys. Now it seemed she'd gone to a law firm instead of having that conversation herself. The fragile trust they had just started to rebuild now felt like it was teetering again. He took a breath, steadied himself. "I'm happy to provide for my sons," he said quietly. He spoke calmly, though the tension in his jaw was unmistakable. "They won't need a lawyer to make that happen. I'm already covering their medical bills, and I plan to do much more. You can tell Marissa she doesn't need to worry." Harrington gave a dry, humorless chuckle. "I'm simply here to ensure that everything is legally sound, and that Ms. Delgado and the children are protected. Handshake promises don't carry much weight when it comes to matters like child support, inheritance, and legal guardianship." Caleb's thoughts spun. He didn't object to financial responsibility. He had never intended to walk away from his children. But the abrupt appearance of a lawyer, especially one this assertive, felt like an ambush. He had hoped to rebuild trust with Marissa through open dialogue, not negotiations overseen by a stranger in an expensive suit. At that moment, Marissa emerged from the twins' room. She stopped abruptly when she saw Harrington. Her face went pale, as if caught in a trap of her own making. "Marissa?" Caleb asked, the pain evident in his voice. "What's going on?" She looked down, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. I didn't hire him officially. I just got scared. I needed advice. I wanted to make sure you wouldn't, try to take them away from me, or shut me out completely." Caleb felt like the floor beneath him had given way. All the reassurances he had offered, the moments they had quietly shared since he arrived, were they not enough to build even a shred of trust? He didn't raise his voice, didn't lash out, but something in his eyes dimmed. "So that's how little you believe in me?" he said, his voice raw. "That I'd show up after all this time just to take from you again?" Caleb stood there, his emotions tugging in opposite directions, anger and hurt, disbelief and sorrow. "Marissa, I told you, I just want to be there for them," he said softly. "I'm not here to take them away. I'm not here to ruin your life." "I know," she whispered, voice cracking. I panicked. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Harrington cleared his throat, stepping in with professional detachment. "Miss Delgado, I've brought the preliminary forms. We can go over them when you're ready." With that, the fragile calm that had begun to form between Caleb and Marissa shattered. What had been a tentative step toward healing was now clouded by contracts and fears. And though Caleb was willing to sign whatever necessary, the confrontation had thrown a long shadow over the fragile progress they had made. Love, fear, money, distrust. They collided like storm fronts, threatening to unravel the delicate bond forming between them. The next morning, Caleb awoke stiffly in a hospital chair, having dozed off during his overnight vigil outside the twins' room. He yawned, stretched his neck, and checked his phone. Dozens of unread messages from his assistant Hannah, and several from concerned board members, pushing for an urgent meeting. He ignored them all. Half the night had been spent replaying the encounter with Robert Harrington, Marissa's teary admission that she had feared Caleb would use his wealth and influence to take the boys from her. Harrington's relentless push for formal agreements had only heightened the emotional strain. Caleb had done his best to focus on what mattered most, Ethan and Aiden's well-being, but one nagging question lingered in his mind. Why had Marissa felt so desperately in need of legal protection? Was there something else she hadn't told him? Around mid-morning, Caleb noticed her talking quietly with Dr. Resnick, the pediatric specialist overseeing the twins' treatment. The doctor's calm smile offered a glimmer of hope. When Dr. Resnick stepped away, Caleb approached. Marissa looked worn down, dark circles beneath her eyes. "They're responding well," she said, managing a tired smile. "No fever spikes since midnight." Relief washed over Caleb. "That's great. Maybe they'll be discharged soon?" She nodded. If all goes well. They stood in silence for a moment, uncertain, fragile. Caleb inhaled, bracing himself, deciding that honesty was his only chance to begin repairing the damage. Caleb took a deep breath. "About last night, I understand why you were worried, but I wish you had talked to me first." Marissa bit her lip. "I know, I'm sorry. There's something else." Caleb's heart stuttered. "Something else?" Their eyes flicked toward the hallway. Then she gently pulled him aside into a quieter corner. "My finances are worse than I let on," she admitted in a shaky whisper. "I've got debts. Medical bills from when the twins were born prematurely. Then Aiden needed surgery at 6 months for a congenital condition. I've been trying to juggle it all, but it's overwhelming." Her voice wavered. "A few months ago, things got worse. The boys got sick again, and everything started piling up. I panicked." Caleb clenched his fists, anger and protectiveness rising inside him. "Why didn't you tell me? I could have helped." Marissa shook her head, eyes glassy with tears. "Because I was ashamed. After the divorce, you became this massive success, and I felt like the failure, like the one who couldn't keep up. I didn't want you to think I was using the boys to get money from you." Caleb took a deep breath, grounding himself. "I don't see it that way. They're my kids, Marissa, our kids. I want to help. Her tears spilled freely now. But I'm drowning. I've fallen behind on mortgage payments. Harrington was recommended by a friend. She said he could help me file for support fast. But I didn't know he'd come after you like that. Caleb's mind reeled. She had been fighting this battle alone, weighed down by debt, parenting 2 children without help, and fearing that he might reject them, or worse, try to take them from her. It hit him in the gut. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore," he said softly. "Whatever it takes. Medical bills, mortgage, anything. I'll handle it. We'll figure it out together." She gave a choked sob, a look of sheer relief crossing her face. "Caleb, I appreciate it, but I need to ask you something. Are you doing this because you feel guilty, or because you care about us?" He reached out, gently placing his hand over hers. "Marissa, I've made my share of mistakes. Yes, I feel guilty, but I also care, deeply, about Ethan, about Aiden, and about you." The air between them buzzed with emotion, a fragile but promising connection. There were still documents to sign, trust to rebuild, and wounds to mend. But for a fleeting moment, there was hope. Hope for forgiveness, for a future, for a family neither of them had dared to imagine. Down the hall, a nurse called out Marissa's name. She wiped her eyes, gave Caleb a small nod, and walked back toward the boys' room. As he watched her go, the weight of every past decision pressed on Caleb's shoulders. Whatever came next, one thing was certain: he wasn't walking away. In the days that followed, Caleb threw himself into the everyday routines of hospital life. He learned the patterns: morning checkups, medication schedules, mealtimes. He sat with Ethan and Aiden, reading storybooks in exaggerated voices to make them laugh. He even tried telling a few bad jokes. Aiden, ever the mischievous twin, let out a soft giggle despite his lingering cough. Marissa observed from a quiet distance, cautious at first. But slowly, she let her walls down. She saw the sincerity in every gesture Caleb made. His awkward, fumbling attempts at fatherhood were not polished, but they were real. And between hospital visits, Caleb met with his financial planner. Quietly, without fanfare, he made arrangements to pay off all of Marissa's outstanding medical bills. Caleb quietly established a trust fund for Ethan and Aiden, though he wasn't sure how or when to tell Marissa. He feared she might see it as an intrusion, but the intent was simple: to ensure their future, especially in case something ever happened to him. But just as he was taking tentative steps toward reconciliation, another complication emerged. Carmen Rodriguez, Caleb's current fiancée. They had been together for nearly a year. Carmen spent most of her time in New York, but together they had been planning a lavish summer wedding in Tuscany. Carmen showed up at Crescent Bay Medical Center unannounced. Tall, poised, and visibly unsettled, she found Caleb just outside the pediatric wing. "So this is why you've been ignoring my calls?" she asked, her voice a mix of concern and accusation. Caleb's stomach dropped. In the chaos, he had completely forgotten to inform Carmen about this monumental change in his life. "Carmen, I'm sorry," he said, taking a hesitant step toward her. "There's just been a lot." She folded her arms tightly. "Clearly, you're here playing house with her." Her eyes flicked toward the room where Marissa sat with the boys. Guilt gnawed at Caleb. He had never been one for secrets, yet here he was, caught in a moment that made him look like a man with something to hide. "Can we talk somewhere private?" he said, guiding her down the corridor. Once they reached a quiet alcove, Carmen turned to him sharply. "You have children? Twin boys?" Caleb nodded slowly, swallowing. "Yes, I just found out, a few days ago. Marissa never told me." Her expression was a storm: shock, hurt, and possibly a glint of jealousy. "And what does this mean for us?" Caleb rubbed his temples. "It means I have responsibilities, real ones, that I never knew existed. I have to be here, for them and for Marissa. But it doesn't mean I stopped caring about you. I still want to marry you." Carmen looked back toward the pediatric ward with a mixture of disbelief and sadness. "But can you really do both, Caleb? You're already buried in work, and now this?" "I know I messed up by not calling you right away," he said, voice thick. "But everything changed when I found out I was a father. Silence stretched between them. She stared at him, watching the turmoil flicker across his face. Finally, her voice trembled. "We'll talk about this later. I need time." And with that, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the tile floor, leaving Caleb standing there with a hollow ache in his chest. His life had become a fragile balancing act, and one wrong step could send it all crashing down. Back in the pediatric wing, Marissa waved him over. The look on her face hinted at news. "The boys are being discharged," she said. It should have felt like a victory. But Caleb's sense of relief was muddied by the unresolved tension with Carmen. Still, he helped Marissa gather the boys' belongings, packing up stuffed animals and spare clothes. His hands moved mechanically, but his mind churned. He was walking into a new life. One that included fatherhood, the potential for something renewed with Marissa, and the looming possibility of losing Carmen entirely. And for once, all his experience in negotiations, in high-stakes boardrooms, in billion-dollar deals, none of it could help. The day Ethan and Aiden were discharged passed in a blur. Doctors finalized release paperwork. Nurses offered warm goodbyes. Marissa signed a stack of forms for follow-ups. Caleb handled the financial side discreetly at the billing desk, settling the full amount without ceremony. He offered to drive them home, to Marissa's modest house in Fresno. Her compact SUV was still in the hospital parking lot, but he convinced her that she and the twins would be more comfortable riding in his spacious Tesla. He would arrange for her vehicle to be delivered later. She agreed, though reluctantly, casting a wary glance at Caleb as if waiting for the catch. The drive took a couple of hours, winding through scenic roads, connecting San Francisco to Fresno. In the back seat, Aiden and Ethan marveled at the Tesla's sleek interior. They giggled at the oversized touchscreen, occasionally begging Caleb to honk the horn just for the fun of it. Despite her unease, Marissa couldn't help but smile watching the boys' joy. When they arrived, her house came into view, a modest single-story bungalow with a small porch and a neatly trimmed front yard, testament to her quiet perseverance. Despite the financial struggle, toys were scattered across the lawn, and faded chalk drawings colored the driveway. Caleb felt a sudden wave of emotion, imagining all the moments he had missed. First steps, first words, birthdays. Marissa gently ushered the recovering twins inside. The interior was cozy, if cramped. The living room doubled as a play space, and the kitchen bore signs of age, chipped countertops, worn cabinet doors. Caleb set the boys' bags near the sofa, standing near the entrance. Unsure whether he should stay or go, he was about to excuse himself when Aiden looked up and asked brightly, "Can you stay for dinner?" Marissa blinked in surprise, then turned to Caleb. "You don't have to." Caleb's chest tightened. "I'd like to, if that's okay." She hesitated before nodding. "All right, let me see what's in the fridge." As Marissa moved to the kitchen, the twins eagerly showed Caleb their favorite action figures and toy cars. Each one desperate for his full attention, he did his best to hide the tears threatening to form as he watched their excitement. They accepted him so openly, without even fully understanding who he was. Just as Marissa was about to boil a pot of water, the doorbell rang. She exchanged a confused glance with Caleb, then went to answer it. Standing on the porch was Carmen, impeccably dressed in a charcoal blazer, her face guarded. "I followed you," she admitted. Eyes flicking past Marissa toward the sounds of laughter inside. "We need to talk." Caleb's heart sank. He'd been so caught up in this unfolding reality, he had barely managed to send Carmen a message. Marissa froze upon seeing Carmen, clearly recognizing her from the hospital. "We can talk outside," Caleb said quickly, stepping onto the porch and gently closing the door behind him. Carmen folded her arms. "Is this where you plan to live now?" she asked, her voice tight. "Playing house with your ex and the kids?" Caleb swallowed hard. There was no simple answer. "I don't know what the future looks like yet. But they're my sons, Carmen. I can't just walk away. And Marissa, we have a lot of history to sort through." Her eyes burned. "What about our wedding? Our life in New York? I agreed to relocate for you, and now you suddenly have a whole other family." It doesn't have to be either or, Caleb replied, but even to his own ears, his words felt thin. He could sense how this all looked to Carmen, how quickly things had shifted. She let out a shaky breath. I love you, Caleb, but I need to know, is there still room for me in your life? Otherwise, I can't keep doing this. Carmen's voice cracked. Before Caleb could reply, the front door opened. Marissa stepped onto the porch, her face taut with tension. Is everything all right? Carmen met her gaze, the air instantly thick with unspoken words. The silence between them bristled with suspicion, history, and uncertainty. Caleb stood motionless as the atmosphere grew heavier. All at once, the tangled paths of his life, Carmen, Marissa, the twins, intersected in the most fragile of moments. He hadn't expected it to play out like this. There was no blueprint for it. Then, as if drawn by the weight in the air, Ethan appeared in the doorway, hugging a stuffed dinosaur. He looked at the adults with wide, uncertain eyes, and in that single look, Caleb saw what truly mattered. Everyone here deserved the truth. Carmen, Marissa, the boys. They all needed clarity, stability, something more meaningful than promises or wealth. But how could he give that when he didn't yet know the way? Night had fallen over the quiet Fresno neighborhood. Porch lights cast soft halos on the sidewalk, but nothing about the moment felt calm. Carmen looked from Caleb to Marissa, her face a swirling storm of hurt and resolve. I booked a hotel nearby, she said, her voice low. We'll talk tomorrow. You need to figure out what you want, Caleb. She turned and walked to her waiting car, not looking back. Beside him, Marissa stood quietly, arms crossed protectively over her chest. Concern radiated from her, but there was also a gentleness there. Caleb turned to her. I'm sorry. This is a mess. Marissa exhaled, her gaze distant. We both made choices that brought us here. But now the twins, they're what matters. I know, he said, voice steady. And I want to be in their lives. I'll do whatever it takes, even if it means flying back and forth between here and the company. She looked at him then, gratitude softening her features. I appreciate that. I don't want them to lose you now, not after meeting you. Through the window, Ethan and Aiden peeked out from behind the curtains, watching them with curiosity. Caleb waved. They giggled and ducked out of sight. A warmth spread through his chest. Come on, Marissa said quietly. Let's go inside. They returned to the living room. Marissa pulled out old photo albums, and Caleb sat beside her, thumbing through snapshots of Ethan and Aiden. First birthdays, finger paint messes, tiny backpacks on the first day of preschool. Each image struck him with bittersweet force. Moments lost, years missed, but also new beginnings. As the evening deepened, Marissa spoke gently about her life after the divorce. The nights of exhaustion and heartbreak, the lonely holidays, the fierce, endless love that kept her going. Caleb listened without interruption, only reaching for her hand now and then when her voice faltered. Later, the sound of small footsteps interrupted them. The boys stood in the hallway in their pajamas, looking hesitant. We can't sleep, Aiden said. Caleb looked at Marissa for permission. She gave a quiet nod. He walked the twins back to their room, where glow-in-the-dark stars shimmered on the ceiling. He tucked them in gently. Are you staying, Mr. Caleb? Ethan asked, voice fragile. Caleb knelt beside them, emotions welling in his throat. You can call me Dad if you want. And yes, I'm staying, I promise. Aiden sat up slowly, whispering, Dad? Caleb smiled, blinking back tears. He kissed each boy's forehead. Rest now, I'll be just outside. Once they drifted off, Caleb returned to the living room. Marissa sat waiting. They didn't need words. They simply sat together, in quiet, in understanding, in the beginning of something new. The days that followed were not without complications, but they were filled with a quiet kind of progress, one born not from perfection, but from persistence. Caleb stayed, just as he promised. He adjusted meetings, set up a remote workspace in Marissa's spare room, and made sure the twins saw his face each morning before school and each night before bed. At first, Marissa had her reservations. She had carried the weight of parenting alone for years, balancing hospital bills, lonely birthdays, and nights where silence echoed louder than any comfort. Trust was not something she gave easily anymore. But she watched Caleb. How he studied Ethan's art projects like they were priceless. How he sat with Aiden during his night terrors without complaint. How he never looked at his phone when the boys were speaking. She began to soften. Bit by bit, her walls came down, and in their place came laughter again, routine, even peace. And Carmen. Carmen returned to New York not with anger, but with confusion and grief of her own. She had built her world with Caleb in it. They had made plans, shared hopes, and now those dreams unraveled in the quiet of a hotel room thousands of miles away. But in time, with support from her friends and the space to reflect, she realized something important. It wasn't betrayal she felt, but misalignment. She and Caleb were not meant to build the same kind of life. She wanted a partner for glamour and jet-setting and curated living. Caleb was now someone different. A man shaped by fatherhood, by quiet mornings with sleepy twins, and dinners eaten cross-legged on the floor. They met one final time, over coffee in Manhattan. No bitterness, no blame. Just two people acknowledging what had changed. Carmen smiled at him across the table, touched his hand gently, and said, "Thank you for not pretending. I think we both found what we were looking for, just not in the same place." And back in Fresno, Marissa stood by the kitchen sink one evening, the sun dipping behind the hills, when Caleb came in, holding a scribbled drawing from Aiden. A house, a stick-figure family, and the words "My Home" scrawled in crayon. He placed it on the fridge. Marissa turned, tears welling, but this time they were warm, not bitter. She had been afraid for so long that letting Caleb back in meant letting pain back in. But here, now, was something else entirely. Renewal. Not a perfect fairy tale, but a real, working partnership, rooted in love for two little boys and a shared past finally faced. Together, they built new traditions. Pizza Fridays, backyard campouts, Sunday puzzles. The boys thrived, more grounded, more joyful. And Marissa found her smile returning more easily. She no longer felt alone in the quiet. In time, Caleb didn't just become dad, he became home. So our story finds its quiet close tonight. And now, to our wonderful friends who stayed with us this far. Are you still here? If you're still watching, then maybe, just maybe, something in this story has touched your heart. Maybe it's the years of silent struggle that Marissa endured alone. Maybe it's the weight of regret Caleb had to carry. Or maybe it's the complexity of Carmen's goodbye, the kind that doesn't come with anger, but with understanding. Have you ever put yourself in their shoes? Would you have found it in your heart to forgive like Marissa did? Or would you still be carrying that hurt, shielding your children with love and fear? See, forgiveness, it's not simple. It's not a light switch. It's a choice, a commitment. And sometimes, it's simply the courage to say, "I'll try again," for them. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." That's what healing looks like. It's when the pain doesn't vanish, but becomes the very path toward becoming whole again. This story wasn't just about secrets or second chances. It was about facing what we fear most: vulnerability, responsibility, the unknown. It was about showing up when it's no longer easy. And isn't that what life really asks of us? So if something in this story made you reflect on love, on loss, on the quiet battles no one sees, then let's not keep that to ourselves. Like this video, share it with someone who needs a gentle reminder that it's never too late. And please, subscribe if you want to stay close to stories that hold a mirror to our hearts. Because in the end, we're all just trying to find home. In people, in healing, in honesty. And maybe tonight, you found a little piece of that here.